Whew, what a good set. Thank you, worship team. Kind of need a second. We are coming to the end here of our wonderful study of First Timothy. We've been looking at this for the past several months. We have this sermon today, and then Pastor John will close it up next week. Then I hope I'm not stealing any of his thunder, but I'm too excited. So I'm going to hopefully, if I steal his thunder, don't tell him. But we're going to the book of Esther next, which I'm very excited for. That should be a really good study. But that's then. For now, we're still in First Timothy, and we're still looking at how to build a gospel-centered church. You know, different passages produce different types of sermons, right? Some sermons are inspirational, some sermons are motivational. This passage today is just flat out practical. And it plays 1,000% into having a gospel-centered church. A big part of being a gospel-centered church is proper stewardship of the blessings that God has given us. And the most tangible of those blessings, the most practical of those blessings that we can take care of are the finances that God has blessed us with. The challenges of entrusting the treasures we're blessed with is nothing new. This is something that humans have been struggling with since money was invented. As far back as Ecclesiastes, written some 930 years before Christ was born, Solomon wrote in chapter 5, verse 10, he wrote, "He who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves wealth with his income. This also is vanity." And so it was already a pervasive problem by then, and most likely was well before then. The first mention of money in the Bible goes back to Genesis 17. And both the Old Testament and the New Testament are, of course, full of warnings about how to handle money and how not to handle money. So, it's a pretty important topic that we need to get right. Amen? What each of us does with our money is very important to having a fully capable, fully functioning, not only willing to act, but able to act gospel-centered church. If each one of us is not good stewards of our money from a biblical perspective, then when the time for action comes, we may find our actions to be anemic at best, if we're able to respond at all. So let's get into our passage here and let's see what this says. We're in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 17 through 19. It'll be up on the board here for you too. But it says this: "As for the rich, in this present age, charge them not to be haughty, nor to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. They are to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share, thus storing up treasure for themselves as a good foundation for their future, so that they may take hold of that which is truly life." So the passage starts here and it says, "As for the rich." So who are the rich? Well, so Timothy doesn't get it mixed up. He says the rich in this present age. Okay, so there are different kinds of riches, right? There is such a thing as spiritual richness, or rich in the next age. So Paul wants to make sure he's clear that we're talking about the rich people here. Okay, he's talking about the materially rich in this present age, not the next one. All right, well, so that narrows it down a little bit. But when he says for the rich, even in this present age, well, who's that? So we have to define who the rich is so we know who this passage applies to, right? So how can we define rich? Well, the tendency, I think, for most of us is to think, yeah, that Jeff Bezos, man, that guy's rich, right? Mark Zuckerberg, yeah, he's rich. Bill Gates, yeah, he's rich. And yes, of course, they are. we look at all the stuff they have and we say, man, I wish I had that much money, right? I wish I had that much stuff. But then if I was to take somebody from the middle of Burundi or the South Sudan and I brought them to your house, what would they say about the stuff you have? Man, I wish I had this much money. I wish I had this much stuff. You see, it's a matter of perspective. So let's just keep this simple and let's remove all the gray boundaries. And let's just define rich as having more than you need to survive. Can we agree on that? Having more than you need to survive. If you have food in the cabinet, a house you chose to buy, multiple cars, a choice of clothing in your closet, and more money and things than you need to survive just this one day, then you're rich. And at the very least, in the eyes of someone on this planet, you're rich. I like how John MacArthur defines being rich. He defines it like this. If you choose how to eat instead of that you eat, if you can choose how to dress instead of that you dress, if you can choose how you live instead of that you live, you are rich. And so, yes, this passage applies to, I would say, almost every person here. So this passage is for you, not just the Bezos and the Gateses of this world. All right, so this applies to us. Okay, then he says, do not be haughty. So for my younger listeners, that means do not be proud, right? You see, the human sin condition is, well, I don't want to say it's interesting. It'd be interesting if it wasn't so sad. You see, in the same thought process that we can think, well, I'm not as rich as Bezos, so I'm not rich. We then turn right around and we see a homeless person on the street and we say, well, at least I'm not that guy. And we never think for a second that to that guy, we are the rich. And this is what Paul means here. He's saying, do not allow the riches you have to give you lofty thoughts or to become arrogant. Always keep in mind that everything you have is a gift from God. And it's all a blessing, all of it. And that will keep you from becoming arrogant, prideful, or haughty. Because guess what? You didn't earn it. You didn't earn it. Even if you could directly tie your wealth to something that you physically did, God still gave you the ability to do that thing, right? He either gave you the ability to reason that thought or to make that decision. He gave you the skills to get that job or to land that deal or whatever it is. So you can't get away from this. You are not better than someone else. You are just more blessed, which is reason for praise and not pride. Again, you are not better than someone else. You're just more blessed, which is reason for praise, not pride. Deuteronomy 8:18 says this, you shall remember the Lord your God, for it is He who gives you power to get wealth. I mean, that's pretty clear, right? 1 Chronicles 29:12 says this, both riches and honor come from you, and you rule over all. 1 Samuel 2:7, the Lord makes poor and makes rich. He brings low and He exalts. See, this is why, back to our passage in verse 17 here, he says to not set your hopes on the uncertainty of riches. I mean, guys, this is just truth, right? The uncertainty of riches. Riches are constantly changing, aren't they? I mean, look what's going on right now, right? You save and you budget and everything's going well, then inflation goes up 20% and everything goes to pot. What did you do to control inflation? Nothing, right? You have no control over that. And you have no control over 10,000 other things that could go wrong. How many thousands have saved their entire lives and invested in their 401k only to have the stock market crash a month before they retire, and now they have to work another 10 years. I just saw a news article the other day that a 74-year-old woman has to go back to work because inflation has drained her entire bank account. She's been retired for 12 years, and she needs to go back to work. That's the uncertainty of riches that Paul is talking about here. Riches cannot give happiness because they are constantly shifting. They are fluid and subject to the whims of mankind. They are not fixed and permanent, but who is? He says, do not set your hopes on the uncertainty of riches. And what's it say? But on who? God. Yes. Set your certainty on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. Notice that it's not just that God provides, it's that he richly provides. And yes, it's the same word as used earlier in this passage. Paul actually uses the exact same word 4 times. He says, as for the rich in this present age, set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God who richly provides. And then in verse 18, he says, they are to be rich in good works. That's the same word all 4 times. We're going to get to some of that in a little bit, but I don't think it's an accident that he did that, okay? It's a very interesting study in comparing and contrasting if you guys want some homework and you want to go do that this week. But I think he's using the same word to say, don't set your hope on the earthly riches because God gives the same thing. And he does so abundantly, okay? He richly provides us with everything to enjoy. Everything to enjoy. A more accurate translation is everything that you have beneficial participation in. You see, having money and wealth in and of itself is not a bad thing. Remember, money is not the root of all evil. The love of money is the root of all evil. And everyone gets that mixed up. But it's the love of money that is the root of all evil, not money itself. Having money isn't bad, but if you love it, if you place your trust in it, if you place your faith in it, now you're in trouble. And if you do that at the expense of helping others, that's when things go wrong. The problem with having money is the temptation to rest in it, not use it. To chase after it. And to not chase after the things of God. To put your feet up so you can rest over your kingdom built with sand rather than advance God's kingdom, which is built on the rock. There's a story in the Bible about such a moment. Back in Luke 12, starting in verse 15, Jesus said these words, and I think these will be up there, yeah. He says this, he says, watch out and guard yourself from all types of greed, because one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. I mean, I could just stop right there. We could just go home, but I got more, so we're going to keep going. But that is the summary of everything I'm saying right there. He goes on, he says, and he told them a parable. The land of a certain rich man produced an abundant crop. So he thought to himself, what should I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops. Then he said, I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to myself, you have plenty of goods stored up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, celebrate. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded back from you. But who will get all that you have prepared for yourself? So it is with the one who stores up riches for himself, but is not rich toward God. You see, it's not the having the riches that is bad. It's what you do with them that matters. Why did this guy get into trouble? He didn't get into trouble for having an abundant crop, but he got in trouble for what he did with those riches. Do you see that difference? He hoarded it. He stored it up. He tried to build his kingdom of sand. It wasn't that he had it. It was how he handled what he had that got him in trouble. His love for it. You see? For time's sake, I'm not going to go there, but the parable of the talents in Matthew 25 is incredibly pertinent here. I would encourage you to read that and reflect on that in light of this passage this week, but we'll move on for now. So what are we to do with our riches? Well, verse 18, back to our passage, says this: they are to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share. All right, so what exactly does this mean? Well, let's talk about what it doesn't mean to make sure that we're not tracking to the wrong destination right from the start. This does not mean to give away all your money until you're destitute. But the tendency here is to think in extremes, so as usual, the truth is in the middle. You see, some people tend to think that if you have any money saved up at all, that that's some kind of sin. But we also don't want to give all of our money away because it's instinctually we know that's not right. And so we end up with like getting all mixed up inside. Well, why? Well, it doesn't help that a lot of well-meaning pastors have used the widow giving 2 small coins as an example of sacrificial giving. But that's actually not what this passage means at all. So let's go read this account and let's get this straightened out. Mark 12:41 through 44. He says this: and he sat down opposite the treasury and watched the people putting money into the offering box. Many rich people put in large sums, and a poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which make a penny. And when he called his disciples to him, he said to them, truly I say to you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the offering box. For they all contribute out of their abundance. But she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she had, all she had to live on. Now here, a lot of well-meaning preachers would say, see, give sacrificially. Like the widow. Give everything you have. She gave everything she had. But that's wrong. Now, to be fair, there are a lot of different truths that you can pull from this passage. That God sees what man does not see. Man saw people putting the big money in. Jesus saw the little penny going in. You could surmise that God evaluates giving differently. Okay, it's not the amount, it's the sacrifice. She gave a penny, they gave large portions, and Jesus said that she gave more than them. You could preach on God commending people who give in faith. And yes, those are all applications, but that's not the point of this passage. Now, we're talking about money and treasure and what we should do with it. So I think we need to get a clear picture here of what's going on, because people start feeling guilty. And if they're not giving every penny away, because, after all, that's what the widow did, right? That's what Jesus commended her for, right? And that's what the preacher said, right? So what's going on here? Well, obviously, context is king. It always is. So let's look at the context. Right before this passage of the widow giving 2 small pennies, we read in verse 38, it reads this. And in his teaching, he said, so Jesus said, beware of the scribes who walk around in long robes and like greetings in the marketplaces, and have the best seats in the synagogues and the places of honors at feasts, who devour the widows' houses, and for a pretense make long prayers. They will receive the greater condemnation. Right after that, it goes into the widow. Right after that, it goes into Mark chapter 13, verse 1. It says this. Do you see, he's talking about the building they just walked out of. Do you see these great buildings? They will not be left here one stone upon another, and will not be thrown down. And then he goes into the signs of the age, and that's where he says, that no one leads you astray in the rumors of wars and all of those things. Now, here's what I want to make. We have condemnation, and then we have this little sweet story about this little old lady giving 2 little old pennies and this little sweet all moment, and then it's like right back to condemnation, right? Does that make sense to anybody? Doesn't that seem like a little odd? You see, in the context, the story of the widow offering is not about giving sacrificially to the point of selling everything you have and giving every last penny to the church. That is patently foolish. Okay, that's absurd. That's not what the passage is meant to teach at all. And no other passage in the Bible does either. We're going to talk about that in a little bit too, but you have to get this right to understand the heart of God and to understand true stewardship of his money. What good is it going to do if you sell everything you have and give everything away? What long-term good is that going to do? Then you basically become the poor one that the church has to support and take care of and be a drain on their resources. Why would God command you to do that? That's just stupid, which is why none of us have done it, right? Again, I think we know instinctively that's not what we're supposed to be doing here. So what is? Well, I submit to you that the little story of the little old lady giving 2 little old coins in between 2 stories of condemnation is not a break from the condemnation, but a continuation of the condemnation. It's all the same story. It's all the same discourse. It happened at the same time. Just because our Bibles break it up with those little headings, it's all the same moment. Okay? It's an example of what Jesus said in verse 40. Kirsten, can we go back to verse 40? He says, "For those who devour widows' houses will receive the greater condemnation." So I submit that Jesus was not pointing out the widow's offering as an example of giving, but as a frustrated, sickening indictment against the Pharisees and the false religious institutions of that day. Because it says that there in verse 40, and then immediately after that, we get to the widow giving her last penny. And Jesus said all she had to live on. Chances are she gave those last 2 pennies and then went away and starved to death. And then she gave those pennies to the corrupt institution who accepted those pennies from the very one they were supposed to be helping, from the very one they were supposed to be supporting, not taking from. Then Jesus says again 2 verses later, he goes outside, and it was it's as if watching the widow was like the last straw. Like, I got to get out of here. He goes outside and he says, this entire thing is about to be torn down. The entire building, the entire system, all of it, brick by brick, utterly destroyed. And so it was, until the prosperity teachers on television got it on and started preying on and devouring those very same widows. It's sickening what these demonically controlled preachers get on TV and promise. Send me your last $100 so I can buy a private jet and watch what God does in your life, right? Preying on the weakest of us, on those who know the least, and they devour them. And worse yet, they cheapen God to boot, as if God was some kind of genie or jack in the box, like you just got to turn the handle a couple more times and God will pop out. Like he's a cartoon character, beholden to our whims and actions. Like he owes you because you gave $100. We just sang about it. It's your breath in my lungs. He's given you the very breath you're breathing. He owes you nothing. And to say otherwise is demonic and sickening. Anyway, the point here is you don't have to give everything away that you own in order to please God. Again, with Jesus and the rich young man, I don't have time to get into this either, but the rich young ruler asked Jesus, what must he do to inherit eternal life? Jesus said, keep the commandments. He says, well, I did that. I've done that since my youth. What else do I lack? Jesus says, well, go sell everything you own and follow me. And the young man walks away. The command there wasn't necessarily, I know that's what he said, but it wasn't necessarily go sell everything you own. What he was showing was, you say you keep the commandments, you haven't kept the first one. Thou shalt have no other God before me, right? He was showing him that his wealth was his God, right? He said, you didn't even keep the first one because he loved his wealth. But that is not a commandment for every Christian. and let me preface per se, right? If God calls you to do that, then you better do it, right? Right? I'm just talking in general terms here, okay? General principles. So here is your biblically based permission. Yes, you can save money. You can have a 401k and you can plan for retirement and all of that. It is okay. That is not hoarding. That is being a good steward and managing of the riches of this present age. But when a brother or a sister is in trouble and you don't help sacrificially because you're trying to save up for a new boat, now we cross that line. Now you're in danger. When your fellow Christian goes hungry because you want to buy a luxury item, that's when you're in trouble. Now, not when you're trying to save money in case you get laid off, or you're trying to save money in case the car's transmission explodes, okay? Right? Are we tracking? I hope that distinction's clear. Now, what might this look like in a real, everyday, modern day, present day example? What would this kind of look like? Let me give a practical example so you can see what I'm talking about. Let's all pretend you need a car, right? And you have the budget to buy that brand new car that you so want. It's sweet. It's a nice ride. You have the budget. You can afford it. Let's say that car costs $550 a month, okay? Now, that's a lot, and you'll be stretched thin, but you have it, and you can afford it. And you can finally get that car or that truck that you've been dreaming about for years. Well, at least until the next year's version comes out, but we won't go there. But you, as a Christian, sitting here under biblically based expository preaching, you, my friend, take passages and sermons like this seriously. So instead, you go get a car that has 40,000 miles on it. That's still pretty new. And you even reward yourself, and you get a couple options that you couldn't have afforded on that new model, like adaptive cruise control or whatever. However, now your car payment is $300, right? So you take that remaining $250. You give $50 a month to Compassion International, so it's to sponsor a child so that he or she can eat and grow up and hear about Christ. And then you take that remaining $200 a month and you set it aside because the next time a brother or a sister falls or needs help, you're going to push $1,000 across that table. You're going to say, you know what, brother, sister, you don't have to worry about groceries for the next 5 months. You focus on getting that job. You focus on getting well. You focus on getting your spouse well. You're not going to worry about groceries. That's on me. The next time a missionary comes in, you're going to drop a $500 love offering. Okay? And you know what? You still have a decent car, right? You got 40,000 miles, but that's still pretty new. You even got some extra features that you couldn't have afforded on that brand new model, and you're ready to help people in need, right? You see what I mean? That's what he's talking about here. That's what he means when he says, back to our passage in verse 18, he says this, he says, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share. Okay, that's what he's talking about there. Do you see that? Now, if you say, well, if I have it, I'll spend it. That's me, right? I understand that. I fully understand that. Self-control and discipline can be very hard, especially when it comes to money. So here's what you do. You donate that extra bit on top of your tithe, and you mark it specifically for the benevolence fund. Some of you may not know, but there is a fund, there is a specific bucket in the church's budget that is specifically set aside to help members of this congregation when times get hard or tough or whatever you want to say. You mark it for the benevolence fund, okay? And if you don't know how to spell benevolence, just mark it the Benny Fund or something, right? I'm sure the counters will know where it goes. But you mark it for the benevolence fund, and then between you and God, you did your part, right? Then it's up to the leaders of the church to distribute as needed and to do so responsibly without enabling and all those other qualifications. But that's up to us to do, and up to us to answer to God for, but you did your part. You were faithful and obedient with your part, and you gave what you could when you could. All right, now let's move on. What's the benefit of all this? What's the end result? Why are we doing any of this? Verse 19, back to our passage here, says this: doing all of that stuff, thus storing up treasure for themselves as a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is truly life. Take hold that which is truly life. Now, we've been talking all along in this series about the problems plaguing Ephesus and all the problems and temptations that Timothy was facing after Paul had left, which is what this letter has addressed. The temptation of wealth would be absolutely no different than any of those other temptations. The allure of wealth, right? The dissatisfaction that even though we have enough, we don't have as much as that guy. They have a newer car. They have a bigger house. They have clothing with names on the labels. And if only I could just get that stuff, then I will be happy. But that's the problem with riches, right? There's always something more to want. There's always something else to purchase. Somebody else will always have more. The moment you buy something, it's out of date. New things come out all the time, bigger, faster, better. So you'll always be hungry. You're never satisfied. You will always be thirsty. Reminds me of Jesus' words in John 4, verse 13. He says, everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again. This water is the earthly water, the material water. He says, everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. Don't you see, family? I mean, this is just the truth. And if you chase riches the entire time, you're just chasing your tail. You're just around and around and around and around and around and around. And when you're chasing your tail, you're not making progress, right? You're not moving forward. And that is exactly where Satan wants you. He wants you distracted and on the sidelines, spinning in circles, completely ineffective against the spiritual warfare raging all around you. Just always looking to the side of what we don't have instead of looking up. And Christ is saying, stop. Stop. Stop chasing that stuff and look at me. I'm permanent. I'm forever. I'm the Alpha and the Omega. I am the beginning and the end. I'm eternal. And you'll never be thirsty again. Reminds me of the other verse. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. What things? What things are added to you? Right before that verse, Jesus says, do not be anxious saying, what shall we eat? Or what shall we drink? Or what shall we wear? Okay. These are those things that are added to you, i.e., everything you need. Right? Let me give you an example from my own life that literally just happened, but I really struggle with this. I almost cut this out because this is such a double-edged sword. Please listen to this story in its entirety. If you listen to the first part and you don't stay tuned in for the second part, you're going to get all twisted up. If you take the first part and you run with it, you're going to run straight off a cliff. Recently, a fellow Christian was in trouble, and my wife and I gave. We gave, and it hurt. We didn't drain our bank account, right? But we gave, and we gave sacrificially. About a month after we gave, through a series of events, now looking back, completely makes no sense, but through a series of events at work, I got a raise during a time of the year when you're not supposed to get a raise. I didn't ask for it. I didn't go for it. It wasn't even on my radar as something to do. Events unfolded, and it happened really with nothing of my will. Actually, If I had had my will, I would have stopped a key event that would have stopped the whole thing if I had had my will. God did it. But now the important part. Please hear this part. You must hear it. Becky and I did not give in order to get a raise at work. Right? You see the difference here? That never crossed our minds. We gave because we felt led to, and because we had saved and we had the ability to, we had the facilities to, but we sought the kingdom first, and then God unexpectedly and without coercion took care of what we eat, drink, and wear. He did not do it as a genie, but as a loving Father. And it's crucial that you get that. But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and then all these things will be added to you. Do you believe that? Well, your attitude towards money shows proof of just how much you believe that, just like the rich young ruler. You see, it's easy to say, and honestly, it might even be easy to believe. But if that belief should have some kind of effect on our actions, shouldn't it? If you truly believe it, ask yourself, what does that belief affect or change about my attitudes? What does it affect or change about my actions? And in this case specifically, we're talking about money. This is true life. You see, in the end, it doesn't even come down to the actual physical money. It comes down to who is in control of your life. Who is in control of your life? It comes down to who are you surrendering to? Are you surrendering to the satanic uncertainty of complete self-indulgence? Or are you submitting to the constant, everlasting, infinitely just, infinitely holy, infinitely right, and infinitely good God? That's the issue when it comes down to money. That's always the issue. The issue is never the money, it's always the heart. Money simply, only, and ever reveals what's in the heart. And that's what we need to address. Money is the symptom. Your heart is the issue. Your heart is the battleground. And the bottom line is, if you give everything you are over to God, then everything you have will work itself out. Again, if you give everything you are over to God, then everything you have will work itself out. There's a poem by James Burton Kaufman called Trusting. I'm going to close on here, but it beautifully demonstrates this mentality. He says this: I cling to faith and honor still as flying years recede, assured that within the Father's will that I shall live indeed. When life with joy and sorrow ends, probation done at last, I thus accept whate'er he sends of sun or stormy blast. Despite temptations strong and wild and nagging doubts inside, I know I am the Father's child for whom the Savior died. Nor fears, nor doubts, nor taint of sin shall shake my confidence or kill the certainty within that trusts God's providence. Some infinite design was his when every life began. And though such boundless mysteries no human eye can scan, the mind of faith may comprehend what angels only know, and always on the Lord depend for guidance here below. The sun, the moon, the stars, the sea, the Father's will obey. Then why should man suppose that he alone may choose his way? Then let the way of God be mine forever and a day, and let his will and purpose shine within my life always.